One of the themes that runs through the Ramban's Perush to Sefer Bereshis is the idea of Maisa of a Simon Labanim. That the episodes that occur in the lives of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov foretell events that are going to occur in the later history of Klal Yisrael. And the idea of Maisa of a Simon Labanim is not simply that it foretells the future events, but rather it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is laying track for the future events. That the mechanism by which HaKadosh Baruch Hu guides the course of history is by creating a certain series of events in miniature that lays the groundwork, or the track, if you will, for these events recurring again later in history. So I'd like to talk about two examples. In last week's Parsha, Parshas Lech Lecha, the Ramban says that the story of Avraham Avinu going down to Mitzrayim really is a Maisa of a Simon Labanim. It foretells the story of the Golos Mitzrayim. And the Ramban draws many, many parallels. First of all, the fact that Avraham went down because of a famine, of course, foretells the fact that this is exactly why Yaakov's sons went down, because there was a famine in Eretz Yisrael. And the fact that Sarah was taken really is reminiscent. I shouldn't say reminiscent, it's the opposite. It foreshadows the fact that one of the Gzeros of Paro would be to drown the males and spare the females. And the Ramban in Parshas Lech Lecha tells us something which he doesn't tell us in Sefer Shmos, which is what was the kavanah of Paro in sparing the girls, that the Egyptians would take them as wives, exactly as Paro took Sarah. And of course, the plagues with which Paro was smitten in Parshas Lech Lecha foretells the Eser Machos, and Avram's leaving Mitzrayim with great wealth foretells the Achre Ken Yetzu B'Ruchush Godol. So there are many, many parallels between the story of Avram and Mitzrayim and the Golos Mitzrayim and the Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Ramban in Parshas Toldos tells us another interesting thing. There is a story there in Toldos of a second famine. Vahi Rav V'Aretz Milvad Harav Harishna Shahayv B'Mei Avram. There was a second famine, and in this instance, Yitzchak Avinu first went to Gror, to Avimelech, the king of the Plishtim. Now we know that Avram had made a bris with Avimelech. This is described in this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera. So this was the first place to which Yitzchak Avinu went, to Gror. But it seems that he was considering the possibility of going down to Mitzrayim. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said no. Vayera Elav Hashem, Hashem appeared to him. Vayera, when he said, I'll take you to Mitzrayim, don't go down to Mitzrayim. Shchain ba'aretz asher omer alecha, stay in this land. Gur ba'aretz azos. And Rashi explains, Shayadaitu levedes Mitzrayim k'mo sheyorad oviv meharov. His intention was to follow his father's footsteps, go down to Mitzrayim. So Hashem said, no, don't go down to Mitzrayim. Sha'ata oilo tmima. You are a perfect sacrifice. Yitzchak was brought on the Mizbeach in the Akedah. Ve'in chutz la'aretz k'day l'cha. It's not appropriate for you to go into chutz la'aretz. You have to remain in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Plishtim is part of Eretz Yisrael. So the Ramban says that Yitzchak Avinu going to Eretz Plishtim is a Maisa of a Simon Labanim. It is Merames to the Golos Bava. To the Golos Bava. The Ramban says, because in the Golos Bava we find an amazing thing. Where did the Jews go back to in the Golos Bava? They went back to our ancestral homeland. Because Ur-Kasdim was where we came from originally. And that's Bava. So the Golos Bava was going back to our homeland. In fact, the Ramban doesn't quote the Gemara, but it's an explicit Gemara in Pesachim Adaf Pei Zayin. The Gemara is discussing various reasons that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose Bava, of all places, to exile us after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara gives many reasons, and one of the reasons it gives is this is analogous to a man who divorced his wife. So where does he send her? He sends her back to her father's house, to her mother's house. So likewise, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu banished us from Eretz Yisrael, where did he send us? He sent us back to our ancestral home, which is Ur-Kasdim, which is Bava. The Gemara says it explicitly. So the Ramban says that when Yitzchak was sent to Eretz Plishtim because of the famine, this is a place where Avram had been. Because in our parsha, Parshas Vayera, we have a long parsha which discusses Avram Avinu's living in Eretz Plishtim. So this is a place where Avram had lived, and now Yitzchak, because of famine, finds himself having to go there. So this is exactly analogous to the Golos Bava, where we go back to a place where our forefathers lived. This is what the Ramban says. The Ramban points out an interesting thing. He says, but Avram Avinu is going to Eretz Plishtim does not allude to Golos. Because you might ask the question, if Yitzchak Avinu is going to Eretz Plishtim alludes to the Golos Bava, because he went into exile in a place where his fathers had lived, so what is the significance of Avram Avinu's going to Eretz Plishtim? For Avram Avinu, this was a new place. So the Ramban says that Avram Avinu is going into Eretz Plishtim does not allude to an exile, because Avram did not go there under pressure, under duress. He wasn't forced by circumstances. He went there voluntarily. Therefore, his traveling there doesn't allude to a Golus. This is what the Ramban says. Now, it seems to me that there could be a deeper kavana here, and perhaps this is what the Ramban means. You know, we say again, Maisa Avasim Labanim. So that which happens to the Avais lays the groundwork for that which will happen later in Jewish history. But it's conceivable that a Maisa Avos can be a simon for a Maisa Avos, meaning that that which happens to one Av lays the groundwork for that which will happen to another Av. Now, to Yitzchak, his experience is going to lay the groundwork for the Golos Bava. But for that, it has to be that Yitzchak goes to a place where Avram had lived. Just like when we went into Golos in Bavel, we went back to a place where our forefathers had lived, went back to Ur Kasdim. So if Yitzchak's experience is going to lay the groundwork for that, Yitzchak has to go to a place where Avram had lived. Now Yitzchak can't leave Eretz Yisrael. So this place has to be somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. It has to be a place in Eretz Yisrael where Avram had lived. So Avram's living in Eretz Plishtim is to lay the groundwork for Yitzchak's living in Eretz Plishtim, which in turn lays the groundwork for the Golos Bava. So there's a significance even in Avram's going to Eretz Plishtim. It's the groundwork for the groundwork. Whereas by establishing Eretz Plishtim as a place where Avram had lived, now Yitzchak's going there can lay the groundwork for the Golos Bava, which is the return to our ancestral home. Now there are two curious things about this analogy between Yitzchak Avinu going to the land of the Plishtim and our going to Golos in Bavel. First of all, how does going to Eretz Plishtim allude to Golos at all? After all, Eretz Plishtim is part of Eretz Yisrael. That's exactly the point. And as Yitzchak wanted to go on to Mitzrayim, because his brother said, no, you're an Oilet Mima, you can't go to Chutz, you have to stay in Eretz Yisrael. So stay in Eretz Plishtim. So if Eretz Plishtim is part of Eretz Yisrael, how can going to Eretz Plishtim somehow allude to the Golos Bava? I want to point out, just make you aware of a very, very interesting machlokas, Rashi and the Ramban. And I believe the Ramban here is Lishitazo. Who were the Plishtim? Who were the Plishtim? So there's a machlokas Rashi and the Ramban in Parshas Dvarim. Very, very technical machlokas, who the Plishtim were. See, there's a very, very interesting pasuk there. The pasuk, as a matter of fact, doesn't even mention the Plishtim, but it mentions areas that we know were cities of the Plishtim. The pasuk says, this is in Parshas Devarim, Perek Beis, Pasuk Chav Gimel. It says, "V'ha'avim hayoshvim b'chatzerim," the Avim who lived in open cities, ad Azah, up until Azah, and Azah, of course, we call Gaza, was one of the cities of the Plishtim. Kaftorim hayotzim mikaftar. The Kaftorim who came from Kaftar, Hishmidum, destroyed them, Vayeshvu Tachtam, and took over the land in their place. So the Torah tells us there was a region up until Aza, which means we're talking about a region that we know from Sefer Yeshua and other places, was the region of the Plishtim. So this was occupied by the Avim originally, and then the Kaftorim drove them out. Now, who are the Avim, by the way? So there's a long Ramban, and the Ramban proves very conclusively that the Avim really are the people that we know as the Chivi. It's one of the Shiva Amim, one of the 7 nations, the Chivi. And these are the Avim. So we call them the Chivi. The Ramban shows that elsewhere they're called the Rephaim, but they're one of the Shiva Amim. They're one of the 7 nations who are descendants of Canaan. Canaan, of course, the son of Cham. And these were the nations that were promised to Avraham Avinu. And they were driven out by the Kaftorim. So what is the meaning of this pasuk? What is the pasuk getting at? So there's a machlokes Rashi and the Ramban what the point in the pasuk is. Rashi learns like this, that the Avim are the Plishtim. That the Plishtim that are referred to in our parsha and in next week's parsha, they are a group that is one of the Zayin Amim, or part of one of the Zayin Amim, and they are related to the Chivi. The Avim, the Chivi, the Rephaim, it's one of the Zayin Amim. But there was a problem, because we know that in our parsha, Avraham Avinu made a bris with Avimelech, and this bris was still in force, according to Rashi, when the Bnei Yisrael were coming to conquer Eretz Yisrael. So this would have prevented the Bnei Yisrael from being able to conquer the land. So what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent the Kaftorim. Who were the Kaftorim? The Kaftorim, we know from Parshas Noach, was a group that was descendant from another son of Cham, named Mitzrayim. And the Kaftorim were descendants of Mitzrayim. And they drove out the Plishtim. So Eretz Plishtim, when Yeshua came, was no longer occupied by the original Plishtim. It was occupied by the Kaftorim, who really were different. The original Plishtim were Avim, from the Chivi, and the later Plishtim were from the Kaftorim, and therefore the bris with Avimelech was irrelevant. So this is an amazing thing, by the way, that according to Rashi, the Plishtim that are referred to in the Chumash, in Parshas Vayera and Parshas Toldos, and the Plishtim that are referred to in the book of Yoshua and the book of Shoftim, and later on in the book of Shmuel, are 2 different groups according to Rashi. They're not the same groups. The original Plishtim, they are the Avim. They are of the Shiva Amim. And they could not be conquered because of the bris that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with, that Avraham made with Avimelech. So the only solution to the problem was to drive them out. So they were driven out by the Kaftorim, and that's why the Jews were able to wage war with them, and therefore the Plishtim that are mentioned in the later Sfarim are really not the same Plishtim. They are from the Kaftorim. That's the sheet of Rashi. Fantastic thing that you would never know, unless you learn Parshas Durham very carefully. That's the sheet of Rashi. It's not the same Plishtim. The Plishtim of Sefer Bereshis and the Plishtim of Sefer Yeshua, Shoftim, and Shmuel are 2 different groups. The original Plishtim are from the Zayin Amim. They're the Avim, the Chivi, the Rephaim, whatever name you give them. And the later Plishtim that are mentioned in Yeshua, Shoftim, and Shmuel, these are the Kaftorim. They come from a different branch of the descendants of Cham. That's the sheet of Rashi. The Ramban says the exact opposite. The Ramban says that the issue is like this, that land that later on came to be called Eretz Plishtim was originally occupied by one of the Zayin Amim, by the Chivi, the Avim, the Rephaim. And way before the times of Avraham Avinu, they were driven out by the Kaftorim, and the Plishtim that are referred to in our parsha are really not from the Zayin Amim. They are the Kaftorim, who are descendants of Mitzrayim, who drove out the Avim, who were descendants of Canaan. And therefore the sheet of the Ramban is that the Plishtim that are mentioned in our parsha and the Plishtim mentioned in the later Svarim are the same Plishtim, and they are not of the Zayin Amim. Their land is land that once belonged to the Zayin Amim, right? And that's why it's really part of the land that was promised to Avraham Avinu. But really it was occupied by the Kaftorim. And therefore the sheet of the Ramban is that the Plishtim are not of the Shiva Amim. Their land is part of the land that was promised to Avraham, but it wasn't occupied by the Shiva Amim at this time. It was occupied by the Kaftorim, who were descendants of Mitzrayim. By the way, I'll point out that there's a Gemara in Bereshis, I'll point out later, which seems clearly to indicate that the Plishtim of Avraham Avinu's time and the Plishtim that are mentioned in the Sefer Shoftim are the exact same Plishtim, and that's the right of the Ramban Keneged Rashi. So I'll point out the Gemara in a few moments. But this is the sheet of the Ramban. It comes out according to the Ramban that Eretz Plishtim is an interesting thing. That the land of Eretz Plishtim is part of the land that was promised to Avraham Avinu. But the occupants of Eretz Plishtim were not of the Shiva Amim. They were not of the nations that were promised to Avraham Avinu. These are Kaftorim, who are descendants of Mitzrayim. So now we understand the Ramban L'Shitaso how Yitzchak Avinu's going to Eretz Plishtim can be a remez to Golos. According to Rashi, it makes no sense, because according to Rashi, at that time, it was occupied by the Avim, by the Chivi. The Shvuah that was made to Avimelech was made to the Avim, as Rashi explains, and therefore it was not only the land of the Shiva Amamin, it was occupied by members of the Shiva Amamin, so how could going there be a remez to Golos? But the Ramban L'Shitaso was very good, because according to Ramban L'Shitaso, the original Plishtim were not of the Shiva Amamin. They're a totally separate nation. So even though their land is land that belonged originally to the Chivi, to the Avim, but the current occupants were not members of the Shiva Amamin, and that's why going there is a remez to Golos. Another ha'ara I'd like to point out, that I think that this Ramban and Parshas told us is L'Shitaso in another aspect. L'char, what's the comparison between Ur Kasdim, the Jews going back in the Golos bubble to Ur Kasdim, and Yitzchak going to Eretz Plishtim? Because Ur Kasdim is really the place we were from. As the Gemara calls it, Beis Iman, the house of our mother. That's really our birthplace. Artzecha Moladetcha Beis Avicha. It says, Eretz Plishtim, it's true, it's a place that Avraham once lived for a time, but it's not really the place he was from. Because what's the exact analogy that the Ramban says that Yitzchak going to Eretz Plishtim alludes to the Jews going back to Ur Kasdim? It's not quite the same thing. Just want to point out, this is also the Ramban L'Shitaso. Because you may remember in Parshas Nayach, there's a machlokes between Rashi and the Ramban where Avraham Avinu was born. Right? The sheet of Rashi is that Avraham Avinu was actually born in Ur Kasdim, in the Far East, in Ur Kasdim. And he traveled with his father Terach as far as Haran, and there HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to him and said, Lech lecha me'artzecha moladetcha, go forward. So Rashi is bothered that how could Hashem say Lech lecha me'artzecha, leave your land, moladetcha, your birthplace? He had left long ago. His birthplace was all the way in Ur Kasdim, but this time he was in Haran, which was halfway to Eretz Yisrael. So what does it mean, go me'artzecha? So Rashi is nidchak. Rashi has a difficult interpretation. Rashi says it means hisrachik, distance yourself even farther. That's what it means. Now, Avada Avram already had left his birthplace. But distance yourself even farther, go even farther west to Eretz Yisrael. That's how Rashi learns. The Ramban, and then the Parshas Nayach, and repeats it, the Parshas Lech Lecha, says, I'll reveal to you the sod, I'll reveal to you the secret, he says. Avram really was born in Haran. And for some reason which we don't know, he and his family at some point moved east to Ur Kasdim. And that's where his youngest brother Haran was born. And then they went back to Haran, but Haran was actually Avram's birthplace. When Hashem said, Lech lecha me'artzecha moladetcha beis avicha, at Haran, it was true. So it comes out, the Ramban L'Shitaso Ur Kasdim really wasn't the place where Avram really was from. It was just a place that he had gone to. So the parallel between Eretz Plishtim and Ur Kasdim, according to the Ramban, is exact, is precise. Just like Ur Kasdim was not really where Avram is from, but he had lived there. He had lived there. So likewise, going to Eretz Plishtim also foreshadows that, because this is not a place where he was from, but it is a place where he had lived. It's interesting to note that the Maral in the Gevuras Hashem Taka asks this as a kasha on the Ramban. That how can the Ramban say that Avram really was born in Haran? The Gemara says that when the Jews went to Bavel, it was called Beis Imon, their mother's house. It was the place where they were originally from. It's not true he wasn't originally from Ur Kasdim. The Maral points out this question. But you have to say that Beis Imon doesn't necessarily mean the place you literally were born. In other words, it's the place you developed. As we know that Avraham Avinu, he rose to his greatest heights in Ur Kasdim. This is where he battled with Nimrod, debated Nimrod, where he was Moshe Nefesh, and therefore it's called his birthplace in the sense this is where he developed. So that's what the Gemara calls the Beis Imon. But it comes out that this is exactly analogous. What Eretz Plishtim was, it was the place that, not where Avram was born, but where he had lived. So that's exactly analogous to Ur Kasdim, which also was not the place where he was born, but it's the place where he had lived. So Yitzchak's going to Eretz Plishtim foreshadows the Jews going back to Ur Kasdim. But what I would like to talk about tonight is a general question. That, okay, Ma'aseh Avasim Lebanim. So why is it that the Golus Mitzrayim is foreshadowed by events that occur in the life of Avraham Avinu, and why is it the Golus Bavel is foreshadowed by events that occur in the life of Yitzchak Avinu? In other words, is there some connection that somehow Avraham is related to the Golus Mitzrayim, and Yitzchak in some way is more related to the Golus Bavel? In other words, it seems halidovru. It's something which requires explanation. Then why is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu lays the track for the Golus Mitzrayim in the lifetime of Avraham Avinu, and he lays track for the Golus Bavel in the life of Yitzchak Avinu? The truth is this, that if we compare Avraham Avinu to Yitzchak Avinu, in terms of the roles they played in the development of Klal Yisrael, without going into any mystical interpretations of the Midas of Yitzchak, it seems that there's a very, very basic difference. Avram is the founder. Avram is the revolutionary. Yitzchak is the consolidator. He is the person who sustains the revolution of Avram Avinu, gives it permanence, gives it lasting effect. Rav Hutner points this out in a very interesting way. We know that Yitzchak is the only one of the Avos who does not undergo a Shinoi Hashem. His name is never changed. Avraham's name is changed from Avram to Avraham. Yaakov to Yisrael. Though Yaakov Shinoi Hashem, the Gemara says, is not quite the same as Avram Shinoi Hashem. The Gemara Brachos points out that Avram Shinoi Hashem is permanent. In other words, if a person calls Avraham Avram, he's over an Aver, he's over a Loisasa, and in Tanakh, he's only referred to as Avram when we are recounting events that occurred before his Shinoi Hashem. Tohu Asher Bocharta bi Avram. So make reference to his selection, we refer to him as Avram. But otherwise, you can never call Avram Avram. So in the case of Yaakov Avinu, even after HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him the name Yisrael, Hashem himself called him Yaakov. So that's a different discussion. So we'll put Yaakov in the back burner. But in terms of Avram and Yitzchak, Avram underwent a Shinoi Hashem. Yitzchak, it's a constant. His name was Yitzchak. He was born with Yitzchak, and that's the name he took with him through his entire life. So the footnote explains that exactly is the difference. Because Avram is a revolutionary. Avram is creating something new. You create something new, it makes sense. You have a new name, right? You're a different person. You're not the same person as the person who started out. There's a Shinoi Hashem, and therefore Avram is a Shinoi Hashem. Yitzchak is the consolidator. Yitzchak takes the revolution of Avram, he gives it permanence. And by the way, it's a very, very different set of talents that are needed in each of these roles. The person who can foment revolution, or create something new, is not necessarily the person that can give it permanence. As we read this all the time, if you read about businesses, there are entrepreneurs that start businesses, and they have revolutionary ideas and new innovative products and great ideas, but they reach a point that to keep the company going, they just have to bring someone in who knows how to run a business and manage a business, sustain a business, keep the momentum going. It's not quite the same thing, right? It's two different skills. Avram was revolutionary. Avram created Klal Yisrael. He's the maskil, he's the innovator. He has a Shinui Hashem. His name is changed because Avram Avinu brought something new into the world. Yitzchak Avinu is born into it. He sustains it, and it's very funny. You mentioned being born into it. I had an experience last year. There's a certain yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, which was founded by a certain Talmud Chacham many, many years ago, and he's Baruch Hashem, he's still alive, still the Rosh Yeshiva. But so many of his children are Rebbeim in this yeshiva. So two of his sons came to recruit for the yeshiva, came to our yeshiva to recruit Talmidim for that yeshiva. So the two of them were both very, very funny people. As you could spend a half hour with them and you'd be crying from laughter the entire time. But one of the things they said, which was hysterically funny, was he says people come to recruit for a yeshiva, they're hired by the yeshiva, to work for the yeshiva, they come recruiting for the yeshiva. He says, we weren't hired by the yeshiva. He says, we're princes. We were born into the yeshiva, right? And we've grown with it. And that's what Yitzchak Avinu was. Yitzchak Avinu was born into it, right? He wasn't a hired hand brought in to keep it going. He was born into it. He was, Footnote calls him the Erste Geborener. He's the firstborn Jew. He sustains the revolution of Avram Avinu. He doesn't undergo a Shinui Hashem. The difference in the Golos Mitzrayim and the Golos Bavel is exactly this. The Golos Mitzrayim is the formative experience of Klal Yisrael. And one aspect of the formative experience of Klal Yisrael is precisely that the Golos is be'eretz lo lahem. They are in a land which is totally antithetical to everything that Jews stand for. We've said many times the Maral and the Gvuras Hashem that says that when you have two groups that find themselves in close proximity, says one of two things happens. Either there is a synthesis or there's a polarization. He says that's what happened in Mitzrayim. Says the Kedusha of Yisrael came in close quarters with the depravity of Mitzrayim. There was a polarization, and the Mitzrayim became more depraved and dug in their heels deeper, and Klal Yisrael became more polarized and more committed to its way of seeing things. So being be'eretz lo lahem, being in a foreign land, really is part of the formative process of Klal Yisrael. This is the Golos Mitzrayim had to be in a foreign land. That's Ger Yiyazaracha be'eretz lo lahem. Because the formative experience of Klal Yisrael is going to be in a land which is antithetical to everything they stand for, because it's from that polarization that Klal Yisrael will emerge deeply committed to its view of things. And therefore, since Avram is the founder, so the Golos Mitzrayim, which is the experience of the formative experience of Klal Yisrael, is merumas in the life of Avram Avinu. Not in the life of Yitzchak, not in the life of Yaakov. Now, the Golos Mitzrayim being the formative experience of the nation, the Maisa of Asim Labanim is in the life of Avram Avinu. The Golos Bavel is something else entirely. The Golos Bavel is really, in Eretz Yisrael we slipped away from our moorings. Our values began to erode. And we had to go away in order to regain our bearings. That's what the Golos Bavel is all about. That's what the Gemara says. That when Klal Yisrael went into Golos Bavel, it's like the woman who her husband sent her away, and where did she go back? He sent her back to her father's house. He says, what's the idea? The idea is like this: you have to go back to your roots, your chinuch. Because you've gone astray. Because you haven't been able to maintain your commitments. You haven't been able to live up to the ideals that you were brought up with. And that's why the marriage has failed. So you have to go back where? You have to go back to Beis Iman. You have to go back to the place where you're from. Go back to your home, go back to your roots, go back to your heritage, etc. And in some real sense, our heritage really is in Bavel. Meaning, because Bavel is the place where Avram Avinu achieved his first victories over Avodah Zarah, right, in his contention with Nimrod. And therefore, when we failed in Eretz Yisrael, and we know, of course, that the main failure in Eretz Yisrael that brought the Galus Bavel was the failure to stay away from Avodah Zarah. So therefore, where did we go back to? We went back to the place where Avram Avinu achieved his first victories over Avodah Zarah. That's Beis Iman. That's going back to Ur Kasdim. The Galus Bavel is not at all an opportunity for a new revolution. That already has passed. That already took place. This is a place where we go for, in a sense, rehab. This is where we go to reclaim that which was ours all along, so we go back to our home, to our roots, where we're originally from. Just mention as an aside, the Maharal points out a very interesting thing about the Galus Bavel. Now the Gemara in several places brings a memory of Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda says that you're not allowed to leave Bavel. That when Klai Yisrael went into the Galus and Bavel, they weren't allowed to leave Bavel. Bavela, Yuvo, the Yiyusham, were mechuyev to remain in Bavel. You can't leave Bavel. So the Maharal doesn't understand why that should be. His question is this, that we're meant to be in Eretz Yisrael. So if we're not in Eretz Yisrael, it doesn't matter where we are. If it's not Eretz Yisrael, what difference is it? America? Is it Europe? Is it Bavel? Wherever it is, it's not Eretz Yisrael. Maharal says no. That Bavel was the place we were meant to go. In other words, and he brings the Gemara Psachim, it's Beis Iman. In other words, it's not the pshat that, okay, you're banished from Eretz Yisrael, now it makes no difference where you go. Right? You have to go to that place. That's the place where you're going to have your tikkun. That's the place where you're going to straighten yourself out. In Beis Iman. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says that you weren't allowed to leave Bavel. You have to be in Bavel. That's where the tikkun is going to take place. Only there, nowhere else. Which is an amazing thing, because you think about it for a second. It's not just you're banished and now it makes no difference where you go. There's something which has to be restored, something that has to be repaired. So where do you go? You go to the hospital. You don't go to the wilderness. There is a specific place you go for your tikkun. That's Bavel. That's Bavel. And therefore, the Galus Bavel is merumas, is alluded to in the life of Yitzchak Avinu. Because the whole avoid of Yitzchak Avinu is to consolidate and maintain the victories of Avram Avinu. That's what Galus Bavel is all about. Galus Bavel is all about maintaining, and in the case where we begin to lapse, rehab, if you will, of the victories that Avram Avinu achieved in his earlier life. So by definition, Bavel has to be going to a place where we've already been. So, in the global sense, in the broader sense, that's Bavel. Bavel is Rekastim. Those were the earlier victories. It says, in the Maisa of the Simon Labanim, it's going to Eretz Plishtim, which was a place where Avram Avinu already successfully dealt with the Plishtim, and now Yitzchak Avinu is going back, in a sense, to achieve these victories again. And if you remember in Parshas Toldos, there's an allusion to the wells that were dug by Avram Avinu and filled by the Plishtim, and Yitzchak redug those wells. That's the premise of this idea. The redigging of the wells of Avram Avinu is the idea that Yitzchak's experience was to reclaim the victories of Avram Avinu, not necessarily something which was totally new. I want to point out a step further that this may explain the difference between the antagonists that each one faced. As we know, the great antagonist of Avram was Nimrod, right? And the leader of the Plishtim that Avram faced and Yitzchak faced was Avimelech. What is the difference between Nimrod and Avimelech? It's an amazing thing. The idea. What is the idea of the Plishtim? What is the quality which stands out about the Plishtim? The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, we know this from many midrashim, that the unusual quality of the Plishtim is the idea of leitzonos. Leitzonos is mockery. is cynicism. The idea of bittul, nothing has any value, nothing has any worth, everything is worth making fun of. That's the idea of late songs. The Gemara says in Bava Basra, on the Pasuk in Tillim, it says, Ashrei ho'ish, ashrei halach ba'atzas rishayim, u'v'derach chatoyim la'omod, v'moishev leitzim lo yashov. It says, happy is the person who did not follow the counsel of the Rishoyim, and he didn't go in the ways of the Chatoyim, and he didn't sit among the Leitzim. So the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says this refers to Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu didn't go Ba'atzas Rishoyim, means he didn't join the Dor HaFlaga to build the Migdal Bava. And when it says he didn't go in the way of the Chatoyim, that refers that he didn't join the Anshe Stoim. And V'Moishev Leitzim Lo Yashav, he didn't join the Plishtim, who are called Leitzim. As we know from Sefer Shoftim, it says, they said, when they took Shimshon captive, they said, let's bring Shimshon l'sachik lanu, that he should entertain us. So you see they were Leitzim. By the way, I just want to point out, I promised to point out, from this Gemara you see that the Plishtim of Avram's time were the same Plishtim as the Plishtim in Shimshon's time. Because the Gemara proves that the Midah of the Plishtim is like Sonos, that Avram Avinu, from Moshe Leitzim L'Yasha, that's Avram Avinu, because you see in the times of Shimshon that the Plishtim were like Sonim. According to Rashi Shita, it's two different people. The Plishtim of Avram's time were the Avim, right? And the Plishtim of Shimshon's time were the Kaftorim. So how do you bring a proof from one to the other? It's a riot to the Rambam L'chara. But in any case, the Midah of the Plishtim is like Sonos. Just to illustrate this, we know from several places. We know that there was a question about the lineage of Yitzchak. The late Sonai Hadar, Rashi quotes, said in the Avimelech Nesabra Sarah. And the Medrash says these late Sonai Hadar were of the Plishtim. So we see that there was one aspect of the late Sonos. But let me point out another aspect of late Sonos. We don't want late Sonos, make a mockery of things, making fun of things, dismissing things. We tend to think that late Sonos is always lightheaded, it's always filled with laughter and glee. Not necessarily so. We think of late Sonos, if late Sonos really means the kayach of bittul, of dismissing things, you can sometimes be indignant. You can be angry. Let's say I make an accusation, or I offer a critique, which is justified, right? And you indignantly deny it. That's also a form of late Sonos. Late Sonos doesn't have to mean that it's a joke and you laugh and with a big smile on your face. In other words, any dismissal of something which is genuine, something real, that's the essence of what late Sonos is. Let me give you an example from this week's parasha. It seems this week we've been talking around the parasha. Lech Lecha told us. We'll give an example of this week's parasha. One of the encounters Abraham has with the Plishtim. Says Avimelech comes and he says that I want you to swear that you're going to be as kind to me and my children and my grandchildren as we were kind to you. Now that itself is a big joke because we look earlier in the story, it doesn't seem that Avimelech was so kind to Abraham, but he says, we want you to swear. So Abraham says, I'm ready to swear, but there's a problem here, that this cannot be a unilateral covenant on my part. You also have to swear. Why? So Abraham rebuked Avimelech about the be'er, about the well, Asher Gozlu Abdi Avimelech. It seems that the servants of Avimelech stole a well from Avram Avinu. So he said, I have to tell you the truth, that your people are guilty of stealing the well. So what does Avimelech say? So Avimelech says, Avimelech says, Lo yadati mi osas v'dober hazeh. I don't know who did this. V'gam natolo higadatoli. And you didn't tell me. V'gam aneichem v'shmati bilti hayoim. I didn't hear it until today. Was he telling the truth? Or was he not telling the truth? So listen to what the Meshech Chochmah says, an amazing Pshat of the Meshech Chacham. He's bothered. Why did all of a sudden Avimelech and Fichoil, his general, all of a sudden they come to Avraham Avinu? There's some urgency that all of a sudden you have to swear to us, and so on and so forth. Like, what's all of a sudden? What happened all of a sudden? So the Meshech Chacham says an amazing thing, that Avimelech and his servants stole a well from Avraham. So until now they thought Avraham was a pushover. He was a marshmallow. Avraham would never retaliate, never take revenge. Right? He's a gentle person. He's a kind person. You can step all over him and nothing to worry about. Then he sent away Yishmael in a seemingly heartless way, and they said, "Uh-oh, this is a person who means business. So we better preempt him. Maybe he doesn't know yet that we stole the well, so let's get him to swear to us in advance that he won't retaliate, and this way, when he finds out, we'll be safe." So the whole thing is a joke, right? They're coming, and they're going to try to get Avraham Avinu to swear that he's not going to harm them, right, in retaliation for an offense they know they committed. So Avraham Avinu says, "Listen, I'm ready to swear, but what about what you did? You stole my well." So, "We stole your well? We stole your well?" So first of all, and by the way, I don't want you to think I'm alluding to anything which is happening in the news nowadays, but I am. He says, "You stole," says, "Lo yadatni also, I don't know who did this. V'gam atolo, we got it till you didn't tell me, and I never even heard about it until today." Let me just tell you an amazing thing that the Netziv says over here. Just pshat in this part. I don't think it's pshat, but it's very cute. He says like this. He says, it seems a redundancy. He says, "I don't know who did it, and you didn't tell me, and I didn't hear it until today." So listen how he reads the pasuk. Avimelech says to Avraham, "Lo yadati mi asa sadavar hazeh." I don't know who did this. Then he turns to Fichol, his general, his right-hand man, and he says, "V'gam ata lo higadata li," and you didn't tell me either. And now the last words are Fichol speaking. I also didn't hear about it. The Netziv says that last line was said by Fichol. It's always bothered me, this Fichol. Right? He always schleps around with Avimelech Fichol. It's Pasha. The idea is like this, when you want to deny something, right? So what do? In other words, if the president wants to deny something, he brings the Secretary of State with him, or the head of the CIA with him, right? And in front of them, he issues his denial, and they're standing there nodding their heads, and therefore they've all denied it, right? Fichol is the person, his job is to know everything. Fichol, in his mouth is everything, all the information, he has everything. The king can't be bothered to know everything, all the details, but this is his right-hand man, chief of staff, he knows everything, right? So any statement that Avimelech makes in the presence of Fichol, it must be the truth, because in the very presence of Fichol, he denies it. So he denies the whole thing. That's the essence of Leitzanos. That's the essence of Leitzanos. Because Leitzanos, Avraham is offering a serious critique, and he's laughing it off. Not laughing it off, he's indignant, he's angry. What? You're accusing me? But that's also the essence of Leitzanos. Leitzanos isn't the humor of it. Leitzanos is the bittul of it. It's the fact that nothing is serious, nothing is important, nothing is real. Everything is buckle. Nimrod is the opposite of Leitzanos. Nimrod's rebellion against the Ribono Shel Olam, as Rashi says, is the idea of Makir Ribono Miskavim Nimrod Bo. Because you recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you defy him. It's a totally different idea. It's not the idea that everything is a joke, nothing is serious, nothing is real. It's real. He's Makir Ribono. He recognizes the Ribono Shel Olam. I don't accept his authority. I'm not bound to him. I'm not meshubed to him. It's a totally different thing. See, Avraham Avinu, as the founder of the nation, his antagonist is the person who has the exact opposite. Avraham is the person, as we said, is the person of Chesed, because he sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kindnesses. He sees all that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for him. He understands that obligates us in return to serve him and to praise him and to thank him. That's the whole basis of Avraham Avinu. his whole understanding of the Ribono Shel Olam and the role the Ribono Shel Olam plays in the world is mechayev him to be grateful and to be oved, to serve mitoich ahava. Nimrod is the person who denies everything. I don't owe HaKadosh Baruch Hu anything. He's Makar Ribono Miskaven Nimrod Bo. I don't owe him anything. It's a total rebellion, a total defiance, and that's the antagonist of Avraham. Yitzchak, in the next generation, who, as we said, is to consolidate the legacy of Avraham Avinu, says what he has to deal with is Leitzonos. Right? Leitzonos nothing is important, nothing is serious, it's no big deal, and so on and so forth. Now, it's an amazing thing. You talk about the lives of B'nai Torah in the last two generations. In the last generation, I guess in my generation you would say, says we battled to be B'nai Torah. In other words, there were many alternatives that were available. And maybe our parents would have been happier if we would have followed some of those alternatives. And we battled. So there was genuine opposition. There was, I don't want to say an antagonism, but there was a debate of genuine issues. In the next generation, our children, right? So Baruch Hashem, they're raised in frum homes, they're raised in religious homes, everything is nice, their parents want them to go to yeshiva, their parents want nothing more, right? What is the battle that they're fighting with? Which is essentially the battle of Leitzonos. That nothing is serious, nothing is important, nothing has any value, everything's a big joke, and so on and so forth. Leitzonos is what the consolidators have to deal with. So the founders, the revolutionaries, have to deal with genuine opposition. So Avraham Avinu, his antagonist is Nimrod, right? Ribono Shel Olam is Avraham Avinu is Makar Ribono Shel Olam and understands that for all that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us, we have to serve him and we have to love him and be devoted to him. And his antagonist is Nimrod, who recognizes the Ribono Shel Olam and says, I don't owe you anything. Makar is Ribono Miskaven Nimrod Bo. Right? Yitzchak, as the consolidator, his antagonist is Avimelech. Avimelech is Leitzonos. Nothing is serious, nothing is a big joke, because that's the challenge that the consolidator faces. Right? But again, because he's the consolidator, for all his challenges have to be challenges which Avraham Avinu also faced. And therefore Avraham Avinu also faces Avimelech and is victorious. And now Yitzchak Avinu is consolidating the victory because he meets Avimelech the second time around, as we explained. I was going to point out one last thing, that one very interesting thing you see about the stories of Avimelech and the Plishtim is that they all revolve around wells. It's a very interesting thing. In this week's parsha, the well that Avimelech stole, and in next week, in Parshas told us, especially the wells that they sealed and Yitzchak dug out, and to be new wells, Esek, Sitna, and Rehovos, and finally Bereshis, the seventh well, and everything revolves around wells. Though we know that Eretz Yisrael, according to the Torah's own description, in Parshas Ekev, Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Harim Uvakaos. It's a land of mountains and valleys. L'mitar hashamayim tishtamoyim. It is totally dependent on rain. We pointed out in the past that stone was the exception. Stone was Kagan Hashem Keretz Mitzrayim because it was irrigated from the Jordan River. It was the Kikar Hayarden. But it seems that Eretz Plishtim, which was the coastal plain, also was different. It was sustained by wells. Now the reason there are wells there is because wells, fountains, really come from the groundwater, right? So in the mountainous region, which is very, very high above sea level, the water table is much, much below the surface, so the springs don't burst forth. At the coastal plain, apparently the springs burst forth, and therefore Eretz Plishtim was sustained by wells. And all the stories of the Plishtim revolve around wells of water. It seems to me like this, that we said it many times, the whole idea of Eretz Yisrael being dependent on rain is the idea that Eretz Yisrael is the place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hashgach is most manifest. As you live in a constant sense of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence because you are totally and utterly dependent on the rain. We said once, several times, that it's only that part of Eretz that was called Eretz Canaan. The Kikar Hayarden was not called Eretz Canaan. says Avram lived in Eretz Canaan and Lot lived in the Kikar HaYarden. So we pointed out, because the only part that's called Eretz Canaan is the mountainous region. Why? Because we said because Canaan is Lashon Hachnoah, is subservience, is humility. Right? Living in the mountainous region, which is totally dependent on rain, that humbles the person. So when a person lives in a place where opportunities for irrigation exist, so the person doesn't have to be humble because the person can irrigate his fields through his own power. Therefore, there's no hachna. That's why it's not called Eretz Canaan. But it seems Eretz Plishtim is also that way. I would just conjecture that perhaps this facilitates the late sonus of Eretz Plishtim. The reason in Eretz Plishtim things are not serious is because they don't see themselves as being totally dependent on the Ribono Shel Olam, precisely because they live in a place where there are wells. They're not dependent on the rain. In other words, in Eretz Canaan, where there's hachna, humility, self-negation, that is the opposite of late sonus. Late sonus exists where I have the leisure to be able to be elate, where I can be dismissive of things. That's the very topography of Eretz Plishtim, implies that. But this is what in the next generation we have to face. Now, the Avraham Avinu faces a Nimrod. The Yitzchak Avinu faces an Avimelech. Because the idea of consolidation, maintaining a revolution, really will always come and face the problem of late sonus, the problem of people that will say, whatever was accomplished already was accomplished, we can take it easy, nothing is important, and so on and so forth. That is, I think, the significance of the Plishtim being the antagonists in this parsha and next week's parsha.